All right, here we go. Okay, cerebral cortex is basically what makes us human. It is what allows for us to have consciousness, meaning this is what allows for us to be aware of ourself, okay? To be aware of our own identity. We understand like how that we are people with internal lives and whatnot. Okay, other animals don't understand this. Okay, other animals don't have that level of consciousness. Like dogs don't have a self identity. Dogs don't like say to themselves like, I could poop in the house, but that's just not me. That's not who I am as a dog. Okay, humans can do that. Okay, so it's the ultimate, it's the higher level processing. And then it also deals a lot with sensation and perception. The cerebral cortex is split into two hemispheres. 12:05, 12:45. Okay. Split into two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. Okay. They're connected. There's a bridge between the two called the corpus callosum. Okay, so the two of them can communicate with each other. And each hemisphere, like, have you all ever heard taking like the BuzzFeed quiz of like, which brain, are you more right brained or left brained? Okay, yeah, that's actually nonsense. Like, that's like pop psychology. Okay, but it is true that like the two hemispheres of the brain are relatively mirror images of one another, but not entirely. They do have a couple of different functions in each one. Like, for instance, the left hemisphere, the most important thing to remember is the left hemisphere has language. Okay, our language areas that we'll talk about later are in the left hemisphere of the cerebral cortex. The right side is more visual, spatial. Like, they say that like the right side is more creative, the left side is more logical. I mean, so each hemisphere is slightly different overall functions, but pretty much the same. And their ability to communicate with one another, makes it relatively equal. So one of the things that's interesting about our brain and our body is we are what is called contralateralized. Contralateralized means that the right side of our brain, and before anybody asks, psychologists don't really know why this is. Okay, it's something evolutionary, but the right side of our brain controls the left side of our body and vice versa. So when we get to here in a minute, like the motor cortex, which sends out motor signals to your body of how to move. The motor cortex that controls the left side of your body is on the right side of your brain. So basically, you have signals that travel like that, like everything like crosses over. Okay, it's called contralateralization. And like I said, it is unclear why that is the case. Okay, questions there? All right. No, we are just talking about the cerebral cortex now. So we're talking about the outside wrinkly layer of our brain that makes up the majority of our brain. Okay. Now, two hemispheres of the brain are connected by a band of neural fiber called the corpus callosum. Means like something body. I can't remember what. Has anybody in here ever dissected a brain before? All right, Aditi, you have. Okay, Aditi, what type of brain? A pig's brain or a sheep brain? Oh, yeah. Now it's kind of gross. Mostly because the way that they smell from the formaldehyde. But so if anybody ever gets the chance to dissect the brain, and if you take a neuropsychology class in college, you will. We had to do it with sheep brains. You'll notice when it's cut down the middle, and you have the two hemispheres, you can feel right there in the middle. Okay, it's like a patch of neurons that feels different. It almost feels like a lot rougher. Okay, that's the corpus callosum. It almost feels like it's kind of like made out of like bark. Um, okay, so corpus callosum, band of neural fibers in the center of the brain that allows for communication between the two cerebral hemispheres. All right, so you can see here, right there is the corpus callosum. That allows for the two hemispheres to talk back and forth. The reason we have to have this is because, and this is kind of confusing, but if you close your right eye and look at the screen to read what is on the screen, okay? All right, now all of us can do this because none of us are split brain. All right, you are able, when you read what is on the screen with your left visual field, your left visual field is sending that information to your right hemisphere. But your right hemisphere doesn't have language. So what it has to do is it sends it to the right hemisphere, and then the right hemisphere sends that neural signal over to the left hemisphere so that you can understand what you are reading. If you didn't have a corpus callosum, as what happens when there's a procedure called split brain, where they cut the corpus callosum to treat epilepsy. If you were to read something with your left visual field, you would not be consciously aware of seeing anything. Because to be consciously aware of something, you have to have language for it. Okay? Like you have to, everything we look at, without language, we aren't consciously aware of anything. We'll look at a video about this probably next class. But so the corpus callosum allows for the two hemispheres to communicate with one another. Okay? Cutting it leads to split brain, which is used to treat epilepsy. All right, any questions there about that? And just FYI, like the limbic system and the brainstem, they are not part of all of this. That they are a different thing. Okay, that's all below. It's like a mushroom, like you have the mushroom top and then you have like the stem of it. Okay. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, we're actually only going to probably get to two of the four, are the four lobes of the brain. Okay? The four lobes of the brain, the cerebral cortex, each hemisphere is separated kind of arbitrarily into four different lobes that all have they separate them by like having similar function. So like temporal lobe right here, the main function is hearing. Occipital lobe back here, main function is seeing. Parietal lobe, main function is touch. Frontal lobe, main function is motor movement and decision making. All right, so it's kind of just a way for us to organize the brain into kind of meaningful parts of it. Now, it's hard to, like, on an actual brain, it's tough to distinguish between the two. You kind of just like you can tell between the frontal and parietal because there's what's called the central sulcus right there, which is a really deep fissure. All right, you can tell the temporal lobe from the frontal lobe because you have the lateral fissure right here. All right, but then kind of the rest of it, they just kind of like say like, all right, temporal lobe kind of ends right here. Okay, so I wish I'm at home, but I wish I have like a brain model in my classroom that I could show you with. I guess I could. Oh, there's the corpus callosum. There's the corpus callosum right there. I'll just, instead of showing the video. Let me see. Okay, so you can kind of see right here, like here's the frontal lobe right here. You can see it's kind of split. Parietal lobe is right there, temporal lobe right there, and occipital lobe back here. Okay, and it's the same, it's a mirror image on each side with the lobes. Okay, and then there's the corpus callosum right there. That is what it looks like. And let me see if there's a, oh, and right there, that's a good one. There's the corpus callosum, okay, thalamus, basal ganglia, pons, medulla, reticular formation, midbrain, cerebellum, and then limbic system is kind of right around in there. Okay. All right. So questions before we get going on the frontal and the parietal lobe. I'm gonna go over those. Yeah. All right. So the frontal lobe, right up here, okay, goes from about right here, comes down to and around your forehead, like that. The frontal lobe, specifically the area right here, so each lobe has kind of different areas in it called cortexes. The area in the front of it, called the prefrontal cortex, is uniquely human. It is the newest part of the mammalian brain in terms of evolution. And it's still trying to figure stuff out. Okay, but this part of the frontal lobe is mostly involved in abstract thought, which is thinking about things that aren't actually there, planning, judgment, and personality. This is the part of the brain that sort of lost control with Phineas Gage. That his like prefrontal cortex sort of didn't have much. That's why his personality changed so much. So newest in terms, so we can call this like, this is like the command center of who you are. How many of you all in here have done something that was really, really incredibly stupid, and your parents afterwards were like, how could you think that that was a good idea to do something like that, to do that? Yep. Anybody want to share? This is a safe space. I won't tell on you. Yeah, like if it's just okay. Yeah, I mean, you can use your own judgment. As I said, I want people to be comfortable in here. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. And at the time though, you might have been like, "Man, this looks like it's fun." Then afterwards, you're like, "Shit, that was dumb." Yeah. Okay. Did you get caught for it? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, yeah, so you didn't just like incriminate yourself there. I knew about it. Okay. So, all have done something really, really dumb. Whether it's like not being able to figure out like where the homework on is on a Canvas page that says homework as a link, or maybe something else. Right? And it's not entirely your fault that you as teenagers make really stupid decisions. All right. It's not entire because your all's prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. Okay. In females, they think in females it's probably fully developed by about the age of 18. But in males, they don't know. Okay. They think it's probably around the age of 25 or so, but it could be later than that. So, would all the females in here agree that you all are almost certainly more mature than your male friends? Yeah, yes. Even if even like you're a freshman girl, you can have a senior guy, and the freshman girl's like, man, I am like way above that. All right. That's because the male prefrontal cortex does not develop nearly as quickly. Okay. So it's not entirely your fault when you do really dumb things. Now, that won't get you out of like a criminal charge saying like prefrontal cortex not fully developed. Okay. Or your parents probably aren't going to let you off the hook, but it is the case. Okay. This area isn't fully developed. This is also why your all's emotions are so out of whack sometimes, because this area does a lot of with controlling emotions. Meaning like your prefrontal cortex isn't really in charge yet. Like you're still it's still as you grow and develop, your brain develops new synaptic connections, and your all's prefrontal cortexes are still developing. Like as a little child, this area like basically the neural connections don't exist, and then they start to grow and grow. Okay. They found that drinking and drugs at a young age um, does gets in the way of prefrontal cortex development or just frontal lobe development. And they have also found very, very low activity in the prefrontal cortex of people with antisocial personality disorder, which those people are usually called what? Anybody know? Well, that's what it's called, but they have a name that you all know. No, no, this is not the people who like would rather stay at home than go out. What yeah. All right. People with antisocial personality disorder called sociopaths or psychopaths. Okay. Their judgment area is not good. Okay. And what's funny is a lot of they when they see lesions on the prefrontal cortex, a lot of people who end up being serial killers have a traumatic brain injury in the frontal lobe at a young age. Like I know Dahmer did, I know, I think Kemper did. All right, so frontal lobe is judgment, planning, personality. And then back here on the back edge by the central sulcus, in front of the central sulcus, is what is called the motor cortex. Okay, the motor cortex is involved in voluntary movement, in sending motor signals out to the body. Okay, so we talked about how we're contralateralized. The left motor cortex controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. Now, right here, this guy right here is called a motor homunculus. A homunculus is a human-like figure. What do you think the significance? Why might, in this drawing, this is a visual representation of the motor cortex. Why in this drawing are his hands, his lips, and his feet so big and other things so small? Exactly. Yep. Okay. The more motor control we have in a part of the body, the more of the motor cortex is dedicated to that part of the body. And the more neural connections we have in that part of the motor cortex. So we have a lot of motor control in our hands. You can see how much of the motor cortex is devoted to our hands. Whereas we don't have a lot of motor control in our knee. Very little of the motor cortex is devoted to our knee. Okay? And getting to be good at something involves building more and more of those neural connections in the motor cortex. Whichever hand is your dominant hand, the opposite motor cortex is your dominant motor cortex. So if you're right-handed, that means that your left motor cortex has the neural connections are stronger. If you're ambidextrous, they're pretty much equal on both sides. But you can make it so I'm naturally right-handed, but from playing lacrosse, I actually practice playing lacrosse left-handed so much that I'm better with my left hand now than my right hand. Okay, that has sort of changed my motor dominance in terms of playing lacrosse. It has something to do like chemistry within the womb. I mean, right-handed is dominant. I think like 90-95% are right-handed. But something with different chemicals that affect it in the womb. It actually, for people who are left-handed, your brains are actually better at adapting to certain situations, to things. They have more plasticity. All right, so motor cortex. Larger amount devoted to in the motor cortex, larger amount of control in that limb, in that area of the body. All right, questions there? We got one more thing. Now, moving back to top right here, the parietal lobe. Goes from right to right about there. The parietal lobe is mostly made up of what is called association area. Association area is area that doesn't have a specific purpose other than taking in sensory information and integrating it and making sense of it. What's called perception. So your ability to look at a surface and know how it would feel to touch it before you actually touch it, that is association area. It's the vast majority of our brain is association area. So I have another slide on this later on. The main thing you need to remember about the parietal lobe is at the front of the parietal lobe, we have what is called the somatosensory cortex. The somatosensory cortex receives touch signals. So in our skin, we have what are called sensory receptors or proprioceptors. We have sensory receptors in our skin that trigger neural impulses. Okay. Anything that is pressure on your skin, pain, temperature, and I'm forgetting what the other one is. And touch. Okay. All of those signals from the sensory receptors are sent up through the thalamus to the somatosensory cortex for us to perceive it. Do that later. And like the motor cortex, all right, everybody touch your nose with your finger, okay, all right, and then your elbow, what's the tip of your elbow called? Isn't it called your weenus? Okay, and touch that very lightly with your finger. All right. Which one was more sensitive? Which one did you feel more? Hopefully your nose. All right. It's the same idea with the somatosensory cortex. The more sensitive an area is, based off of the amount of sensory receptors in that area, the more amount of the somatosensory cortex is devoted to that area in the brain. So you can see here, face, big area. Elbow, small area. Now, look at how close these two are. Okay, they literally are separated just by the central sulcus right there. Why is the somatosensory cortex and the motor cortex, why are they so close to each other? What's the point of that? Because they what? They work with each other. Why do they have to work with each other? Exactly. Okay. All right. You're outside. You're getting bitten by mosquitoes. Okay. You get bitten by a mosquito. What's the first thing you do when you get bit by a mosquito? Or you're outside and you're like slapping them, trying to kill them. Right. That's direct communication between these two. Bitten by a mosquito. All right. Tells your motor cortex to tell you to slap the mosquito off of you. Okay. So it's two things. They have to be able to communicate with each other very, very, very quickly. If you burn your hand, you have your hand on a hot stove, you don't want it to take a while for that signal to get to your hand to tell you to get your hand away. You want it to be really quick. Well, but it it depends on if so there was that question on that. But I mean, for you to be able to feel your hand burning, that's your somatosensory cortex. So, like, if you're not looking at it, you might not know that your hand is on a hot stove until you feel your hand burning. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So you can see here, there are the arrows coming up and then arrows going down. All right. Somatosensory cortex sends it out to sensory neurons. Motor neurons send signals to the motor cortex. Okay. All right. Last thing, and we've actually already looked at this, but this is just to reiterate. I do have two videos on here. We don't have time to watch them, but if you watch this one, it's just a couple minutes. So this is a video on showing a guy getting brain surgery, and they are mapping his sensory and motor cortex. If when they're mapping these areas of the brain, they'll use little electrodes and they'll send a really light electric signal into the area of the brain. And let's say that they send the electrical signal to your thumb area, right? Your thumb will just automatically move, right, without you even doing it. Or if they send it to the lips area, you may feel sensation on your lip. Okay, so that's what this video is. And then this video is very, very cool, showing somebody basically using their brain to use to work a robotic arm. Okay, so all right. So last thing, motor and sensory homunculi. Already talked about it. Okay, but visual representation of the amount of the brain that is taken up by each part of the body. See here, big hands. Okay, so a lot of motor control, very sensitive. This guy right here had to censor him. Okay, but in terms of the somatosensory cortex, our genital region takes up there's a lot of it dedicated there because it's very sensitive. Okay, all right. Any questions about any of that, guys, before I let you off on your own to do asynchronous? The other two lobes are really easy, so. Okay, all right. So